get Hitler off the front page. No, we don't need to cover that. Like bumping all of these things, right? All these things that are like very significant, right?
Right.
And then he's like, no, keep the rooster story. It's human interest. Hey everyone, and welcome to episode 7 of Cinemaball. I'm here with my co-host and opponent, Dame Ebony Asta. Hello, Ebony.
Hello.
Hello. Cinemaball is, of course, a ridiculous excuse for Ebony and I to talk about movies. Our goal in this game is to connect one movie to another through actors, directors, production folks, through whatever wacky means we can devise to get to the goal. And the goal of this round, because of me, is the
That's right. Yes. Take that shame.
Is the 1998 Jean-Claude Van Damme film Knockoff. So I'm on offense. I'm trying to get us to knockoff, while Ebony is on defense, understandably doing everything in her power to stop that outcome from ever coming to pass.
This summer, Jean-Claude Van Damme. Knockoff.
Last week, Ebony, for some reason, and I don't know why she would do this, almost fumbled the Cinemaball into the time cop zone. I think maybe a time cop came back and stopped you from doing that because us watching Time Cop would have been a cinematic crime.
Yes, it absolutely would have been a cinematic crime, but I called myself trying to help you out. Because I was like, maybe Caro is getting tired of this round. We should just pull the Band-Aid off. I'm gonna, fumble the ball so that you can just slam dunk it.
No.
With knockoff.
You need to, Ebony. I thought you were strong enough for Cinemaball. You need to be ruthless. You need to be.
I know. I was so ready to take that dive, Caro, and for no money.
No. But thankfully, that timeline did not come to pass. That's an alternate timeline. Some Ebony and Carolyn and some alternate universe.
Darkest timeline.
Darkest timeline had to watch Time Cop. My thoughts are with them. But here in this timeline, we instead watched the 1979 thriller, nuclear, quasi-disaster film, political thriller, The China Syndrome.
The China Syndrome. It's about people who lie, and people faced with the agony of telling the truth.
Starring Michael Douglas and Jane Fonda and Jack Lemmon, among other recognizable folks. So at the end of this episode, I'll announce our next film, and boy, do I have a story for you. But for now, it's time to sweat our way through the anxiety of impending nuclear catastrophe. Ebony, go ahead and kick things off for us. Tell us a little bit about the China Syndrome.
Awesome. Okay, so first of all, let me just say from jump how much I love this movie, and I'm so glad we're going to get a chance to talk about it. Like Caro said, movie comes out in 1979. It's directed by James Bridge. And the China Syndrome is often described as a disaster movie, and it is, but it's also so much more. Not least because the disaster that's alluded to in the title, the China Syndrome, thankfully, mercifully never happens.
Right.
So it's set in the Los Angeles of the the late 1970s. It's a contemporary story for the year it comes out, and it's basically the story of Kimberly Wells, who's played by Jane Fonda, who is a news reporter, but only in the loosest sense of that term. She covers a pretty soft, non-newsy beat, the kind of human interest stories is
right.
what they're called, until by chance she stumbles on this huge story when she's doing this fluff piece on the Ventana nuclear power plant outside of LA. And while she's there, this, event occurs that ultimately leads the shift supervisor on duty, who's played, the character's name is Jack Adele, played to perfection by Jack Lemmon.
So good.
To realize that crucial safety protocols have been shortcut, and at any time, there could be another event that triggers like a catastrophic nuclear disaster. So the rest of the film is about Kimberly and Jack, trying to get those facts out, and simultaneously Kimberly like trying to convince her station bosses that she's capable of telling that story, that she's more than just the reporter who can do like kids' birthday parties and visits to the zoo. She's partnered with Michael Douglas, who is also a producer. Like, that's how I, linked the Cinemaball in this episode, is through Michael Douglas, who we talked about last week in Romancing the Stone. And he plays kind of her, like, roguish cameraman and also the person who kind of forces the issue when he steals footage of the inciting event that they shot illicitly. He steals that from the station, and that kind of kicks off the kind of rush to get this story out.
Right.
It is. Yeah. So yeah, it's like I said, it's often billed as a disaster movie, but it is very much in the vein of the kind of political thrillers that like Alan Pakula, for instance, was very famous for, like All the President's Men or The Parallax View.
Yeah. So I was really impressed with this film, the way that it wove gender politics and expectations seamlessly into this story. Also, that is also about like journalistic ethics and about capitalism as a destructive force. Because what happens, right, is that there's a huge cover-up, basically, to prevent the story of this near catastrophe from getting out. The company doesn't even want to invest the money in the measures it would take to make the plant assuredly safe for the future. They want this story to completely go away, and they wield all kinds of power, both like through kind of putting the squeeze on Kimberly's sort of higher ups at the network to like not let this story get out, like, oh, let's wait until we have all the facts or this or that, when it's clearly like, no, but let's just make this whole thing go away. Also through physical violence. There are a few moments, a few scenes. This is, of course, the late 70s was like the golden era of like cinematic car chases.
Oh my gosh, and cars going over cliffs.
Yeah, like and there's like two, I mean, they're not like they're not like the French Connection car chase or the car chase in To Live and Die in L.A., which is amazing. But they're interesting, compelling, like little car chase segments. But I was really fascinated with, as I said, you have this reporter played by Jane Fonda who. She is repeatedly, constantly reminded, not only by her male supervisors at work, but also by people in the public, that she is just a pretty face, and that people watch, like their ratings are going up, right, because they have this beautiful woman who does these like cute human interest stories. You have that scene at the beginning where you feel like her and her partners are preparing for like to do some serious news segment, and then the reveal is that it's about singing telegrams. Yeah, and it's just it's kind of this, it just kind of cuts your expectations down, and it kind of makes you feel, because I don't know, there's just something about Jane Fonda as a presence where you kind of know that already that she's probably wants more for herself, which she does, and she actively campaigns for that throughout the film. I just think this film is really insightful about power, because she has this job, and if she doesn't want to jeopardize it, she wants to move up within the system. You have Michael Douglas, who's in a sense is being, you could argue that he's being more principled and more ethical, but also he doesn't have the same things at stake that she does, because he's like an independent contractor, so he can the network cannot like destroy his job because he's got probably other clients, other jobs. He'll be fine.
But even if he worked at that station, it's safer for men to be assholes in a work situation than it ever is, safe for women or people of color, right? Like, he has the luxury of being seen in one way when he stomps out of a meeting with the network brass in a way that Jane Fonda's character could never do.
Right, exactly. And yeah, like there's a point in exchange they have where, he's like kind of demanding, putting all this pressure on her to break the story regardless of the pressure and the refusals from her higher ups. And she says to Michael Douglas, like, if that means they've got me, they've got me.
Mm-hmm.
And it made me think about how I have worked for a video game news organization / review website, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I definitely had some leeway and freedom to raise issues in my reviews, and people know that I historically did that. But also, it's definitely true that that there were stories and things that I did not report on that I wanted to. My principals told me that, oh, this is an important story, we should absolutely be covering this, but that within that system, I just, at the time, I literally could not. And I sort of reasoned like, well, I guess I sort of assuaged my conscience by being like, well, I do more good still as a trans woman, as a presence in this space than I would like if I weren't here anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll just sort of swallow these realities and kind of keep working to change things. But yeah, like sometimes when you are within these systems, there's only so much you can do.
Yeah, and I found like Jane Fonda, if you, granted, I know people love her in like Grace and Frankie and other recent projects she's been in, but if you have never checked out the work that she did in the 70s, you really got to do it, because there was a period when the kind of work that she was doing on screen was absolutely captivating. Like, you just can't take your eyes off her, and you're completely immersed in the story that she's telling through her body language, through her eyes. She's a fantastic actor. And so I loved the way, like, you're never in doubt that her character, Kimberly Wells, is incredibly smart, and knows how to speak her mind, but who also knows that she has to modulate her approach depending upon what audience she's in, right? So part of the really effective thing the movie does is that we open on Kimberly, at the site of this news story. We don't yet know that it's just about singing telegrams, but we think she's on location somewhere, and we see her prepare for it, and she's talking before she goes on air, right? And so the shift when she's not on air to when she goes live, right? There's that stark shift, but then also when she's talking to the men in her life, whether it's the station brass, whether it's Michael Douglas's character, whether it's Jack Goodell when they're in the bar and she's, really pressing him for information, we know she's got the chops. But then the way that she's forced to shift in the scene where she's with her boss Jankovic at that like work party or whatever.
Yes.
And they're sitting on a couch together, and you're struck by the way that she softens her voice. And, sort of her body language becomes more languid, and she becomes, sort of more receptive in that way as she is attempting to get him to agree that, yes, she is capable of doing harder news stories. Like, it's a complete shift from the way she's carried herself before,
Yeah.
And, misogynists would say that she's being manipulative in that moment, but it's much more complicated than that. In this movie, like you say, like the stuff that it's doing around gender is really just, thoughtful and kind of precise.
Absolutely. So on the other, I mean, obviously these two stories are very interwoven, but you could also kind of look at them as two different kind of corrupt and fucked up systems of power. You've got the news network, and then you've got the whole power corporation and the power plant and everything, where the film definitely takes pains to acknowledge as well the kind of differences in hierarchy and power there, because so after the event, the near disaster event, which Jack Lemmon and his crew prevent from happening, but there's maybe some human error. There's one gauge that they're like not paying attention to a certain gauge, and they're paying attention instead to a gauge that's giving them false information, and then at a certain point they realize it's false, but they should have noticed it sooner. So one of the other one of the people in the in the plant, the control room, is the, you know, always reliable Wilford Brimley.
So good.
Yeah, and so there's they have to go to testify to this like the commission. I guess it's like an internal commission of the company, and there's a scene where like after the testimony has happened, and I think it's like probably the first time that Jack and the Wilford Brimley character have been back in the control room again since the testimony. And Wilford and Jack sort of like almost, you know, not good-naturedly, but sort of just like, how was the testimony? Mm-hmm. And Wilford Brimley kind of turns to him and he's looking like shaken. And he's like, man, the way you ask me that, like I was in there for 7 hours, twice as much as anyone else. Mm-hmm. And like, you know that in a situation like this, if you know, they probably want a scapegoat, they probably want just someone to blame. Yep. And you know, who do you think it's going to be? Right?
Yeah, he has that great line where he says, like, you know, where do you think the acts of human error will follow?
Right, exactly.
You know, and Jack Gazelle's like, well, why do you think that? And he's like, tradition, you know?
Tradition.
It's so, you know, fantastic because Wilford Brimley's character is dressed in, you know, like plaid shirts, rolled up sleeves, and jeans, whereas Jack Lemmon's character is dressed in that sort of like typical, you know, middle management, you know, with like slacks and sweater vests and everything. There's something really savvy going on with class in this film as well, right? Between like the kind of blue collar, long time worker that Wilford Brimley represents, who says straight out, like, I don't have the background that you do. Like, I've never been management. I've just, you know, like, I'm one of the grunts. Like, I help build this.
I'm a company man.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
You know, then up the ladder to someone at Jack Goodell's level, right? Who's more comfortably, you know, middle class. And again, you know, like with the pointing out the nuance that it's not so much about how much money these men make, but what categories they occupy, right? So Wilford Brimley as, you know, representing kind of the working class, Jack Lemmon representing, you know, a step higher, and then the vastly out of sight, you know, power and wealth represented by the men at the top. I mean, when they say in that, you know, like, that I'm not sure if it's a boardroom or a hotel penthouse room, but this room, this like palatial kind of suite that they're in, having a conversation about the inciting incident and, you know, how long the investigation should be allowed to go on and whatever. And they're talking about, and remember, this is 1979, and they're saying every day this plant is closed, we lose $492,000 a day.
Yes.
In 1979. Like, there's no way at which that level of wealth outlay can continue to occur. Like, this is big. This is huge. You know? And you think, okay, if they're losing that much money in 1979, how much more does this represent, like, these kind of companies in 2018, right? Yep. So, like, one of the things that I loved, again, about the opening, so not when Jane Fonda is on screen prepping for her news story, but the scene of the car she's in driving down the LA highways, right? And, and we see like the power lines, and we see like the highways themselves and the canals. So the opening shots of all of that infrastructure, you know, it's just so awesome because it just emphasizes like, it's ubiquity. It's everywhere. And the size of it and the way that it's rapidly kind of eclipsed the humanity of the people it's supposed to serve.
Yeah. I also appreciated that for me in that shot of the you know, she's like her and Michael Douglas and the crew just all in this vehicle kind of, cruising that down to the power plant, which is like, you know, it's outside of like LA proper. You drive through those beautiful like rolling hills and stuff that are around outside LA, and I really appreciated how the film goes from, to me there's such a sense of like wind in your hair freedom to that vision of California, and you know, and them just like, you know, these people who like each other cruising down to like do a little work together. It's not gonna be a tough day on the job. It's just like a little fluff piece. You know, they're probably, you know, it's probably like kind of fun for them. And then to when you're in the control room of the power plant and it feels so claustrophobic, even though it's quite a large chamber, because, you know, like you're in a sense like if the catastrophe happens, you are trapped in there with it, right?
Right.
So yeah, I just thought that shift in tone was really effective, and but you're right too. Like, it's so like this film is it's very perceptive too and true. Has a lot of truth to communicate about capitalism and how at a certain point, I mean, any like a corporate machine like that is functioning at that level, where, as you say, it's like they're losing, $490,000 a day or whatever. Like, you have this one figure ultimately in the end who's kind of making these like really awful decisions to silence people and have the story basically be crushed. But he's just like a human like representation of the fact that these kind of capitalist corporations and systems cannot prioritize like human safety or human life, right? They cannot. They have to prioritize profit at basically any risk, right? To their employees, to other civilians, to the environment, to anything.
Right, because ultimately those men and the structures that they set in place will always be the survivors. Like they're the cockroaches, right? Like they will not be the ones who experience the blowback. If some sort of, environmental disaster happens, yes, the company might be hit with some, nominal fine, but they will continue to do business. It's, the people who are around who will, suffer.
Yes.
And so, and yeah, their understanding of what they're doing is completely different from the people who are below them, right? So like when Jack Adele and Kimberly are in that like Regal Beagle kind of bar out by the nuclear power plant where everybody from the plant hangs out. And Kimberly's getting ready to leave, and he says, when you turn on the lights tonight, just think like that's 10% me. He's thinking about like the service aspect of it. That's not at all. It's dollars and cents to the men who are above him, who are trying to engineer this cover up. And one thing that I think is so well done is the way the film conveys that this nuclear power is exponentially larger than any form of power that has come before it. So we've had these kind of, robber barons on railroads and, for the oil fields and, for at every stage in human history, there have been these kind of people wielding this kind of power for their own greedy ends.
Yeah.
But nuclear power changes the game because they are treating it and that technology with the same kind of casual disregard and lack of care that they've always shown, but that is radically insufficient for this kind of power, Right. Like we have been completely outsized and outpaced, at this point, which,
yeah.
Like, I just think, it's so prescient for 1979. Oh my God, I love this movie so much. I hope everybody sees it.
Yeah, and, so I basically, I have a kind of deep hatred of most like local news broadcasts. I think that they are genuinely often harmful because I think that if it bleeds, it leads, mentality makes people scared. It makes people see the world as kind of dangerous. And I just don't think it serves the public interest at all. I don't think that news, should be like ratings driven at all. So I really appreciated how, this film kind of makes us think about, too, the way that the media can be a puppet and a tool of capitalism, because that piece that they are doing or that they're meant to do about the nuclear power plant, it's not just like a harmless little informative piece about how nuclear power works. I mean, that's what it's sort of presented as, but it's actually really like propaganda for like nuclear power as like this safe revolutionary power source. It doesn't take into account all the risks and the dangers and the fact that there are people out there protesting against it every day, which this film thankfully also does a great job of representing and showing us. You know, there's so many activists and people in this film who you see trying to stop the encroaching, the spread of nuclear power. And it just, it made me think about just like the history of activism, and how, how, again, like this is sort of recalls my point at the end of LA Confidential, but like how, I mean, obviously activists matter. We make a difference. We, who knows what would happen if there were no people marching in the streets, speaking out against injustices and dangers and so on. But it's like, but still, you can't. So the world never changes for the better as much as we would like it to, I guess is what I'm saying. It's like the capitalist machine still soldiers on. And, like the work of resisting and pushing back against those systems is ongoing, right? It's like, yeah,
absolutely. I mean, like, just to flip to the end, real quick, after everything has happened and we close on, again, the shot of the monitors and the editing bay of the news station. And we've got, the preview screen showing, Kimberly kind of surrendering to the emotion after this intensely, traumatic scene where Jack Adele has been shot. And there's almost been another incident, or there has been an incident that luckily, didn't go any worse. And then on the screen that's actually going out is a commercial for microwave.
Exactly.
Right? It's just this film, it doesn't underline things, it takes you a minute to see, but it's so well done because this is, it is the advertisers who are paying for this news to come to us, right? Like that's how we get it, is through the money that's paid by advertisers. And so of course, the stories that we're allowed to see and the takes that we get on them are going to be dictated, to a greater or lesser degree by the people who are paying those bills. And so the fact that it is a microwave oven, which, in 1979 is still kind of a new, hip, awesome thing. But, think about what a microwave is, right?
Yeah.
Oh my God, it was so good.
Yeah, absolutely. So this isn't so much about this film, but just a thought that I had while watching this film about human interest stories in general. I thought I didn't really know that in my mind, the human interest story has always been associated with local news broadcasts. At the end, there's always the little heartwarming story about the squirrel at the park or whatever it is. The doctor who makes house calls for fish. So a few weeks ago on Feminist Frequency Radio, you and I talked about His Girl Friday.
Yeah.
And there's a joke in that film. So that film, made decades prior to this one. And you have at the end of that film this scene where so Cary Grant is this newspaper editor, and he's trying to clear the front page. He's on the phone with someone back at the publishing, at the office, trying to clear room on the front page for this breaking story that that they've been trying to get for the whole film. And he's like, no, get Hitler off the front page. No, we don't need to cover that. Bumping all of these things, right? All these things that are very significant, right?
Right.
And then he's like, no, keep the rooster story. It's human interest. So just human interest has been this thing in journalism for decades. The goofy story with no news value whatsoever that's just supposed to make people feel a little bit of heartwarming or make people chuckle a little bit or whatever.
Right. And I mean, which is not, we're not saying that there's not a place for that. You cannot survive, especially in our current moment, on a nonstop diet of the kind of intense, graphic, like horrifying news. Like the 24-hour news cycle, I do think is doing like palpable harm
absolutely
to people,
agree.
right? But there's a difference between going that direction and surrendering to either like the Nightcrawler version of this, right? Which is another movie I love, of just, like straight up, if it bleeds, it leads. And, if we need to, we'll manufacture the crime that we want to show. Like TMZ level, whatever. It just there's a way that we can thread the needle better than we're doing now. I don't think anyone is particularly well served by the state of at least American televised news.
Absolutely.
I want to talk about Jack Lemmon.
Yeah.
And how phenomenal he is in this role. So as we, go through the week, like after we decide what the movie's going to be and we chat in our work Slack channels about this, and, we were, sharing that, like there's no one does this kind of character better than Jack Lemmon. I think he's like 55 at this point in his career. Like he's the perfect age for this, depicting like a man at exactly the point at which someone becomes so disillusioned with what is around him. And it is so moving too. So when Jack is in the hearing after the event, as they call it, and he takes responsibility when he's being asked, well, why didn't people check these other dials? Like, why didn't that person, do this thing that would have avoided this crisis? He stops and he actually thinks, and he takes responsibility for it. Some of it might not even be his, but he knows that ultimately the buck stops with him.
Right.
And the fact that he is the only person there who is willing to do that, and then later in the film, once he discovers that one of the safety monitors has been falsifying reports, the way he conveys that utter disbelief that someone would do this, like those kind of striking moments of honesty and sincerity, the way that, we feel uncomfortable with them because we thank God that there's someone who's, willing to take that stand, but we also see all of the forces that are arrayed against him. And to be honest, I think from the very beginning, we kind of know there's going to be no happy ending for him.
Yeah.
I mean, even before he takes the security guard's gun and, kicks everyone out to say like, okay, I gotta stand up. I have to be heard. Even before that, I think we know there's going to be no way out for him. There's just too much arrayed against him.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, obviously his career is so storied. From earlier films like The Apartment, which is a classic sort of Hollywood comedy by Billy Wilder. Of course, Some Like It Hot. He was in all these sort of comedies, but then like later in his career, such a just an honest, dramatic actor, like an actor who's like there's never like a false note with him, and he brings this, to Glengarry Glen Ross. I think he breaks your heart in that film. Shortcuts by Robert Altman. He gives a beautiful performance in that. So definitely like an actor. Like often films are worth watching just for the Jack Lemmon performance. Sometimes even if the film around it is not so great. Just fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, there's not a single major or minor role that I would have recast in this.
Yeah, it's a wonderfully cast
Peter
film.
Donat to what's his name? Jack Hampton, Wilford Brimley, Jack Lemmon, Michael. Like everybody in it is so perfect. Absolutely perfect.
Yeah, I mean, Michael Douglas definitely brings. I liked how he was able to bring humor to a few moments in the film.
Yeah,
like there is a moment where. I think it's when Kimberly is kind of venting about the fact that the network is so intent on keeping her in this like pretty face human interest story role, and she's talking about like, oh yeah, I have to go. So if this doctor pays pays house calls to fish, do you call those aquarium calls? And Jack Lemmon, Michael Douglas just like rolls his eyes, which like everyone, like we should all collectively like roll our eyes at these kinds of like at this kind of garbage. So it's like, thank you for being the, my reaction in that world, Michael Douglas.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
So, let's go ahead and wrap up our discussion of the China Syndrome with a rapid fire round of the Fab Five / Furious Five. This is where we give you a quick taste of those things we absolutely loved, hated, were confused by, or just plain can't stop thinking about. After that, we're gonna do a new feature where we pair, how you might go to someplace and they'll pair the food with a fine wine or tell you which cheese goes with this. We're going to do a lovely pairing where we tell you which film we might pair with this one. And we call this segment Sommovier. I haven't even said it out loud before. So it's a play. Get it? It's a play on I don't even know how to say the real word.
Sommelier.
Sommelier. So it's a Sommovier. That's so we will be filling that role for you as well in case you want to put together a little double feature of the China Syndrome with another film. So Ebony, go ahead and take us through your five Fab / Furious 5 list first.
Yeah, I have got a Fab 4 and then a fucked up final one. So that's what I got. So on the Fab side, excuse me, in the initial event, when Kimberly and the crew are initially at the Ventana power plant, and there's a scene, there's a moment where, in fact, it's longer than a moment, and that's kind of what's so great about it, when the camera is lingering on Jack Lemmon's face as he waits out this countdown, as they are waiting, to find out if the water levels can be raised on the core or if they're just entirely fucked. And there's this bead of sweat on Jack Lemmon's forehead, and you just know in that minute what kind of an actor you're dealing with there. Like he is in that moment, he believes it.
Right.
Oh, so good.
Yeah. I'll have to say, toward the end, this is such an effective film, just even on the level of a thriller, that I honestly thought for a bit that it might be, go really bleak and dark to really drive the point home, and that the worst thing could happen. And so there was a period there where I'm like, oh God, is like everything gonna just go bright white any moment, or something, like, because Jack Lemmon in particular is so great at conveying that feeling of just that kind of how much is at stake, if something goes wrong in that moment.
Right. Yeah. So that's one. My second was Kimberly's pet turtle. Just a weird thing that she had. It's never explained. She just has a pet turtle. I assume it's her pet. It was outside her door. She brought it and she certainly knew it. She had lettuce for that pet turtle. Loved it. I again loved the line when Wilford Brimley's character says, "Where do you think the acts of human error will follow? Tradition." He knows he's going to be the fall guy if something comes through. I loved that. I loved when Jack Goodell goes out in the field to see the security monitor who has falsified those x-rays, and when they have their confrontation and Jack is leaving, the security monitor is chasing him down, trying to convey like the gravity of what the forces are about to come down, and he keeps yelling, "They have their own security men,
right?
They have their own security men."
By which he means like basically hitmen or people who will take you out if you try to break this story.
Exactly. And just the panic, in his voice. Yeah. It was fantastic.
Yeah.
So that's my Fab 4. And then the final fucked up thing is, so again, China Syndrome comes out in 1979. It is immediately, unsurprisingly vilified by the nuclear power industry, who claims that it is fear-mongering, it's alarmist, it's gonna, it completely misrepresents the dangers of nuclear power. 12 days later,
Oh
12 days
God.
later,
Oh
3
my
Mile
God.
Island
Oh my
nuclear
God, of
disaster
course.
happens.
Yeah.
You know, like, are you fucking kidding? Truth is stranger than fiction. Like, I couldn't
Yeah.
believe that when I learned that factoid. So that's my 5.
Yeah. Yeah, some of these are things that we've already mentioned. You know, I just love the opening reveal of singing telegrams. Like, it's just such a random thing. And then, you know, and Jane Fonda just kind of putting on that smiling face and kind of like soldiering through it, even though you already know that like she thinks this is dumb and it's not what she wants to be doing. And, you know, you have these people doing all different kinds of singing telegrams, and it's just a great opening scene. Also, just the theme, the way that the film throughout, like how Jane, there's constantly like little moments of her checking her makeup, the little ways in which the film constantly kind of reminds you of like the scrutiny on her appearance. You know, like one of her bosses at one point, I think, says like, "Oh, I like your hair that way."
Yeah.
You know, and they like praise her, but it's in such an infantilizing way. You know, like she's you know, one of them at some point calls her a performer specifically, which clearly means like not a journalist.
Yeah.
So, you know, so good. At handling that theme. All right, number 3. I'd love. There's a little glimpse of as they're kind of coming back from commercial at the news studio. The main anchor like waving away the cigarette smoke that he'd been smoking during the commercial break. Like just like those little moments of truth of like how things actually function in these spaces a lot of time, or certainly did in the late 70s. I was going to mention the turtle too, but instead I'll mention like the furniture at Fonda's place. Like in particular, she has this like goose lamp or something, like a duck lamp or something. I don't know, but it was just like it was quirky. Like it had personality to it, but was also quite charming.
Yeah.
I also just love the fact that she was driving around in this like little tiny Toyota or something, you know.
Hey man, the gas shortage, you know.
Yeah.
They didn't have the SUVs back then.
And finally, so there's a shot in the sequence like leading up to the initial event, a shot of a cup of coffee, and you see the vibrations in the cup of coffee. And that is like basically, you know, nowadays if you see that in a film, everyone immediately thinks of like Jurassic Park.
Right.
Like, but, you know, that shot obviously did not originate with Jurassic Park.
Right.
And so seeing it in this film kind of made me wonder, like, oh, I wonder what maybe was maybe the first film to do the thing to, like, signify that a vibration, an earthquake, or something is, like, approaching by showing some liquid in a cup or some vessel, kind of like the surface of it starting to ripple.
Yeah, I didn't even notice that, but that's a very good question. If you happen to be listening and you know, like you're a film historian and you've got an idea, definitely hit us up because that's very interesting. Yeah.
So now let's go ahead and pair this film with another film. Ebony, this was your brilliant idea. The title and everything came from your amazing mind. So I'm trying to think if I should go first because I think I know what film you're gonna say. And I think people. So let's build. I think people will like yours more. So I'm gonna do mine first.
Okay.
There's a, in my mind, really fantastic romantic comedy drama from, I think, 1988, James L. Brooks film called Broadcast News.
Yes.
Which is every bit as concerned as this film is with journalistic integrity, with what the responsibility of journalists really is. It, like this film, it has honest depictions and insights into how the news gets made, like how it actually happens. You know, in this film, you see the little monitors in the studio control room. There's a lot of great stuff like that in Broadcast News. You have Holly Hunter in this amazing early performance as a news producer, and there's just these virtuoso scenes of her kind of guiding William Hurt, who's like the pretty boy reporter. And so it just really, it also gets into the collision of the personal and the professional, right? Because you have the three main characters, Holly Hunter's character, William Hurt, and a fantastic Albert Brooks, who's, they're all in the news game. They're all journalists. But Holly Hunter's character and Albert Brooks' character have like real ethical standards. They are so committed to their ethical standards. Mm-hmm. William Hurt's character, he's kind of just like a handsome guy who will raise ratings by being this handsome, reliable presence on the news, but he doesn't have that same ethical backbone. And yet Holly Hunter falls in love with the guy without the ethical standards, while Albert Brooks falls in love with Holly Hunter, who shares his ethical standards. So it's this complex, like, love triangle, and, what do we expect of the people we love? And anyway, but it's, I think it's just such a smart, sharp, funny, heartbreaking, moving film, and definitely in my mind covers a lot of the same territory as this film with regard specifically to news broadcasts and how they happen and the power dynamics involved in shaping them. Yeah.
No, that's a fantastic choice. And I will allow you to pair any movie for me. So, of course, if you give me an opportunity like this, I'm always going to go for the glib answer, right? But I seriously think... So, my choice to pair with The China Syndrome is Anchorman. 2004 movie with Will Ferrell, Christina Applegate. And I'm dead serious about this because, Anchorman is obviously, a parody of this period in broadcast news, right? But what we have in The China Syndrome is an actual artifact from that era, right. That is giving us a very accurate depiction of what newsrooms were like in that period and how you cannot really imagine how foreign it was to have a woman in the newsroom and then to have a woman doing, hard news, right? So obviously Anchorman is a comedy. It's, it's ludicrous beyond belief. but the issues that they're talking about, there's a reason why it's set in 1974, right?
Yeah.
Because we're at the cusp of this change. And so the stuff that Kimberly Wells, Jane Fonda's character, is going through, I just think there's a very, there's a funhouse mirror version of it in Anchorman that I think it could be very fun. Obviously, I could have gone for something like Michael Clayton, which is another really amazing whistleblower movie, but I'm choosing instead to go with Anchorman.
Yeah, great. All right, now it's time for us to render our verdicts on this film using Ebony's Brothers' patented 100-star scale. On each episode, we rate the films we watch and keep a list of all our ratings in the document you can find in the podcast description. Ebony, where do you rank The China Syndrome?
I think this is an almost perfect movie. Mm-hmm. So I am giving it one of my highest scores on the 100-star scale. I'm giving it a 95.
Great. I'm actually surprised that this isn't a film that I've heard more about. To me, this seems like it should be a classic of the era. I mean, and maybe at the time it was, but it's not one that has stayed part of the cultural conversation so much in my experience. Mm-hmm. And I definitely feel like it should still be because the issues that it raises about, again, just capitalism and journalistic ethics and, gender, gender dynamics in those kinds of professional spaces and everything are still so sharp. I'm giving this film a 90.
Love it.
So I have a lot of admiration for this film. All right, Ebony.
I am so every round we just get higher and higher. I am ready.
So last week, you, in explaining the process by which you came to land on The China Syndrome, you briefly mentioned in passing one of the films you suggested was, or thought about rather, was Judge Dredd. If you had chosen Judge Dredd, that would have been my ticket to victory because Rob Schneider is in both Judge Dredd and in Knockoff.
Wow, I am not good at this game.
However, so, be that as it may, so I also, like, time is running out for me because if we get to episode 10 and I haven't scored yet, it's going to pass over to you anyway.
Yeah.
So I was watching this film with, a little bit of desperation, and I was actually, I have to say,
I wish y'all could see Carolyn's face right now.
But this is true. You may not believe this, but this is true. I actually thought to myself before watching this, like, just based on the era that this film was made in and, like, the kind of roles the actor that I'm thinking of plays, maybe he'll be in this movie. Maybe he'll be in this movie.
God.
So, what a feeling of jubilation and relief I felt the moment Wilford Brimley appeared on screen, because guess whose Cajun uncle he plays in the John Woo movie Hard Target?
No.
That's right, Jean-Claude Van Damme's Cajun uncle. So
God.
So we are watching Hard Target, which I am converting into a field goal.
Wow.
It's not the goal of knockoff, but so I don't get the full score. But I think it's about as close as I'm going to get at this point. I don't want to press my luck any further that I may not get this chance again. I also think Hard Target probably will be more fun and interesting for us to watch and talk about anyway than knockoff would have been. So
because it doesn't have Rob Schneider in it?
No, well, that's definitely a plus. You know who else is in it, though, who we just talked about also on Feminist Frequency Radio, our boy Lance Henriksen.
Oh!
So,
yeah.
Yes.
Oh, my
yes,
God.
yes.
I'm going to need a smooth 36 hours to recover from this news. Even though you are taking the field goals, you are now ahead in terms of points. I am happy to see you up on the board with such smooth move. This is why Carolyn plays in the major leagues, everybody.
So I'm super excited for next week's episode already.
Yeah.
I hope you folks at home are as well. That's going to do it for us this week, folks. Thank you so much to Simplecast, which hosts both this podcast and our flagship show, Feminist Frequency Radio, which you should also be listening to. We'll see you back here next week for another round of Cinemaball.
Bye! Oh, wow. I am super, super duper, super excited.